When you need a lawyer, how do you find the right one? Contact the Chicago Bar Association.
Whether you've been injured or need a will prepared, whether you're buying a home or starting a business, having the right lawyer is essential. The Chicago Bar Association have lawyers who practice in most areas of law and speak a variety of languages.
Don't leave it to chance. Get a referral to a screened, experienced lawyer. Visit chicagobar.org or call 312-554-2001. The Chicago Bar Association. Se habla español.
Welcome to You and the Law, a Chicago Bar Association production focusing on legal matters and policy matters of public concern. And we have with us today a very, very special guest, Mr. Bruce Fein, who I'm so thrilled has taken the time to join us today with all the things he has going on and has done. And it's the holidays, and you might think that he would just be maybe taking it easy, but he's a very busy person and he's here to help educate us, we Chicago lawyers, but also the general public on a legal matter and the principles, frankly, the political philosophy principles and principles of civics and human nature, I think, too, and philosophy that are embedded in this lawsuit, and frankly, I would say well represented in his career. And with that, I won't go on and on because there's so much to say. Mr. Fein, thank you for being here. If you could provide us a little bit of background to get us oriented to you, your career, and your conception of what we lawyers ought to be doing for the public. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'll try to be brief. I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near the path of Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. I was always fascinated by the Battle of Bunker Hill. I think John Quincy Adams there with his mother Abigail when it actually happened. So I've been steeped in the American Revolution and the Constitution since I was born. I spent some time out in California when my father had some work at Stanford, but came back east again to Harvard for my education and the law school. I think that I've always been devoted to the law, not as a trade, but because I believe that its underlying principles of life, what is to be applauded and what is to be deterred, always rests on philosophy. It came clear to me, even in my law school education, that the law in isolation is a very flabby discipline. Because all the ideas of right and wrong, why we make something prohibited or why we encourage it, is based upon, the Old Testament, the New Testament, you could say the Holy Quran, are ideas of what's just and not just, Aristotle, Socrates. And so without understanding philosophy, you really don't understand the impulses of the law. The law really is an echo chamber of the philosophical convictions of society. And it's very clear to me that the law school, I believe, unfortunately, does not inculcate that in the students, because I grew up thinking that the purpose of the law, and I got this from James Madison, it's in Federalist 51, is justice. He wrote that justice is the end of government, it's the end of civil society. And if the law is unjust, you change the law, or you work to change the law. You don't say, well, it's going to be hard to change, I can win for my client. If it's an unjust law, you don't want your client to win. You just need to serve other people. And I think the idea that, every client, everybody has a right to a lawyer, really is an effort to evade philosophical question. What am I doing with my life here? You have choices as to who you represent. I'm not suggesting anybody's denied due process, whether it's pro se or otherwise. But I do not believe that you can just close your conscience and somebody pays you, no matter what they're asking you to argue, you go and make the case, because all clients in some sense are an opportunity cost. If you're doing X, you're not doing Y. If Y is something superior to X, that's what you should ought to be doing. And that's why I think a great omission in law school education, and I've written about this for the Harvard Law Record, and I work from time to time with Ralph Nader, is we don't inculcate ethical precepts. And that's why, again, I've written regularly, you look at some of the most monstrous times in U.S. law, they're architects of the Harvard and Yale and Stanford law graduates. I think of the Japanese American concentration camps in World War II. Who were the architects? John McCloy, famous Harvard law graduate, assistant secretary of war. And he says, well, if I got to choose between locking up Japs and the Constitution's just a scrap of paper to me. The Harvard law graduate. Francis Biddle, he was the attorney general at the time. He's another Harvard law graduate. He said, well, this is racism, but Roosevelt said he wanted him to do it, so he just swallowed the racism and say, okay, I'll give a pat on the back to that. Franklin Roosevelt himself, these are Ivy League graduates. These are not people of no education and the Visigoths, sacking Rome. These are our best and brightest. Where is your ethical compost? And the great irony is the one who opposed the concentration camps was J. Edgar Hoover. He went to Knight Law School. So there's something wrong with this. Sure. Now, J. Edgar Hoover, I'm not suggesting his motives were always the most laudable, but anyway, he said, yeah, we can track these people item by item. We don't need to have these concentration camps. Right. But he was overruled because, in part, it was a political calculation of everybody. The battleground states where the concentration camps or the Japanese American removed, Washington, Oregon, and California were important. And Roosevelt's already thinking about the next election. And there was huge racism out in California. It stemmed back from the Yellow Peril, the Chinese coolies coming in, building the Union Pacific Railroad. Anyways, a whole history that anybody who knows the West Coast will understand. But the larger point is, how come these are what Richard Halberstam would later say, the best and the brightest do all these horrible, immoral things for power? And so that's sort of the philosophical attitude I had graduating from Harvard Law School. I don't want to overstate my background. And then I went down, I clerked, and then the first job I had, the Office of Legal Counsel, the Justice Department, was right after the Saturday Night Massacre, when acting Attorney General and Robert Bork said, we got to investigate what were impeachable offenses. That hadn't been done since 1868 in the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. At that time, there was a huge Chinese wall between the department and the White House. Nixon had his own lawyers. We had our lawyers. There were efforts to recruit Justice Department attorneys. We all said no. The rule of law is way, way too important. I remember right now, I can remember this is the Great Hall of Justice in Elliot Richardson. Man, it was like packed, more applause than in a Taylor Swift concert, right? Everyone stood up. It's 100%. Everyone fixated the rule of law. We understood. This was in some sense the Saturday Night Massacre said, this is like the burning of the Reichstag. That was the mentality we had. We can't go away. We have to stand up. The president says it's legal. That doesn't mean it's legal. So I worked on that for 2 years, really, every day until Mr. Nixon resigned under a cloud. I'm sorry for the lights here.
That's right.
Okay, I think we got that back on. And so anyway, I spent about 10 years at the department in various capacities, Office of Legal Counsel, Associate Deputy Attorney General. I was involved in part for the judicial selection process and left in part because I wanted to do more writing, and I decided in government, I was glad that I had the experience, but you definitely have limits to what you can do, in part because you have superiors, and if you're going to stay, you have to follow the management chain. And I didn't want to follow the management chain if I didn't want to. So I left and have spent a huge portion of my remainder of my life in think tanks and writing, and have my own law firm, which I have now, and taking on what I considered important cases. I actually was counsel on the Iran-Contra, a joint congressional committee that's famous or infamous for Ollie North and the diversion of the funds. And
Dan Webb's office is right across the street. One of the great American trial lawyers, Dan Webb, was, so there's a lot pay attention to that over here.
Dan Webb was there. I remember Dan. He was the U.S. attorney, and this is when I was in the deputy's office, and I remember there was a big free speech case that he was involved in. It was whether to prosecute a chaplain. He'd embezzled funds, but he said the funds that he'd embezzled, he was using. He bought some condos in Florida. Was it really church funds or not? If he investigated, was this going to violate church-state separation or whatever? And Dan was certainly he was a wonderful lawyer at that time, and then he went on later on and accomplished many, many great things. But anyway, the sum and substance is my career now has, gone through a series of litigation and writing to try to get the Constitution restored. I basically think it's gone off of life support. Nixon was kind of the high water mark of following the Constitution. And you remember there was this famous or infamous interview he did with David Frost. And he said, oh, when the president does it, that means it's not illegal. Everyone was shocked. What do you mean? Where's that? That's something that King George III would say. We fought a revolution to get rid of King George III. No, as Thomas Paine said, the rule of law is king in the United States, not the other way around. The king is not the law. But since that time, we've been focused on the fact that we've let the Constitution run away. In part, it's because, it begins more in the national security area, but it comes back and infects domestic law as well. And that's because, in my view, again, taking a philosophical look at the United States, we decided, especially after the collapse of the disintegration of the Soviet Empire, we would make a Faustian bargain. The heck with liberty and the rule of law and privacy. We want to conquer the world. Now we can do it. We're the only superpower. And therefore, ordinary rules of conduct go out the window. And that's basically what's happened. The war power has been surrendered to the president, the treaty power that we do executive agreements, not treaties anymore, the delegations that the Congress gives to the president to do virtually anything he wants. They don't
always
define
in
what is
service of national security, always in service of national security.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just a rubber stamp for everything. And Congress doesn't try. They pass the National Emergencies Act, but they don't define what a national emergency is. They have this International Emergency Economic Powers Act that's president can do anything he wants to disturb an economic transaction if he says it would affect national security. There are no standards on this. The courts themselves don't enter into the equation. Oh, it's a political question. Sure. We don't want to get involved in this. The state secrets doctrine is utterly insane. What they protect is a state secret, torturing people, assassinating people. It's a cover-up for government crimes.
Let me stop you for just a moment, because there's so much to get into. And if there's something you want to handle, you can tell me to get out of your way. But I want to cover a couple of things. And a couple of points you just brought up in the course of providing some of your background and your interests. It might give you some, and hopefully you've seen some of this too. It might give you some, comfort when I tell you, I went to Loyola. I've actually taught there in a variety of capacities, but one of the courses that's a newer course is a professional identity formation course that's specifically about getting lawyers to be conscious of the social justice impact of the law. So I think that's good. It's one of the things you were talking about earlier, sort of trying to train lawyers to not just be technicians administering flabby or lifeless law, but to actually breathe, the spirit, of justice into it by being conscious of the manner in which the law, has, impacts folks differently and sometimes institutionalizes violence, which has, adverse consequences in our democracy.
No, for sure. And just to add, I define this as justice. We never have perfect justice. That's our aspiration, because I think perfect justice has every person's position or station in life correspond exactly to two elements own: their character and their accomplishments, nothing else. But we know that's not going to ever be fulfilled, because there are at least some impact on your development that you don't control. You don't control where you were born. You don't control who your parents were. Now, I don't believe that they are dispositive of what you result in. I believe in free will, is what Samuel Johnson said. All theory is against it, but all experience is for free will.
Certainly our justice system embraces the concept of free will.
Yeah, for sure. Otherwise, we couldn't have law at all, right? So, but so we want to try to make and work towards the law that tries to move towards justice, so that it's just character and accomplishments. Nothing else should be involved. And that
Yeah.
justifies why the laws against discrimination, anything other than character, I think if the law said you can't evaluate anybody else in public life other than character and accomplishment, I think that's almost perfect justice.
Sure.
I don't care anything. Singing Beethoven, or whether you're LGBT plus, or whether you like ice cream that's vanilla rather than somebody else, who cares? As a human being, the only thing that counts about you, your character and accomplishments.
Right, right. So with that, I want to switch gears and I want to pivot to sort of, other things that you've been up to, including I have not finished this because I just received it over the holiday break, but
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through it. American Empire is one of your writings.
Yes.
It houses many of the concepts that we're talking about here, including what I think my take is in large part, this is a criticism and a look at the foreign war sort of character that's driving a lot of our policy and impacting our domestic policy too. I mean, that's one thread that runs through this, which I think is consistent with what we're talking about now. If you can share a little bit about just your writing, and then we can transition into the case that you filed against Secretary of State Blinken.
Sure. See, I think it's somewhat artificial. And James Mattis would try to separate domestic from foreign. He says the instruments of power, purportedly created to address foreign danger, come back and destroy liberty at home. And that's why if you can take, when we turn into an American empire, I mean, let me make this simple statement that should shock the audience. At present, we endow the White House, and it's been true at least since 9/11, President Bush, with authority to play prosecutor, judge, jury, executioner, kill anybody he wants on battlefield or off battlefield in secret, based upon unsubstantiated guesses. Oh, you could be a national security threat. Anytime you try to get the standards when this power of God is exercised, nope, state secrets, and the courts ratify. So we don't even know what the standards any president uses, and one president doesn't buy another, to just wipe people off the earth. I mean, talk about Gilbert and Sullivan. I've got a little list in the Mikado. I mean, this takes that to a new level, but it's not a laughing matter. We know at least a couple of cases leaked out. The teenage son of Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S. citizen, was exterminated in Yemen, eating dinner with a friend. Oh, well, that's collateral damage. It's not collateral. It's collateral damage, but it's also what I consider first-degree murder. There wasn't any declaration of war. You don't get to just jump, invade another country's sovereignty at your whim. And yet this is the current landscape of the law with regard to the power. And now with the Supreme Court's decision last June in Trump v. U.S., okay, they're criminally immune.
Sure.
Civilly immune. You go ahead and commit assassinations. Okay, that's okay. You can be the Godfather on steroids. That's O'Karan and de rigueur in the White House. They're supposed to be setting the example for the people. So that's it. So the American empire is, and it's written about 10 years ago. And unfortunately, everything I predicted there has come true in spades. That is, don't worry, we're going to continue to expand. We weren't going to limit ourselves to just, at that time,
that was concerning as I was reading it, for sure, how accurate it was, impression to some degree. Now, I hate to interrupt, I really do, but we have under 10 minutes, and I would love to get you to your case, Gaza versus United States Secretary of State Tony Blinken.
Yes.
So in those 10 minutes, and you can jump wherever you want to. I'm not trying to, steer you any direction. I just want to make sure we cover this. Can you give us an overview of just, how would you present this to people who didn't have a concept? This of what this is, because you filed a lawsuit against the Secretary of State for provision of military aid to Israel, a foreign state, which sounds quite complicated and lofty. So if you could just,
I don't want to I'm hesitant because sometimes the language can be very evocative, but basically we have become I call the IG Farben of the Middle East. We have laws go back to 1997 with Senator Pat Leahy that try to say we should not be providing arms, military security assistance to units of foreign government that have engaged in gross violation of human rights, right?
That's gross violations of human rights is sort of the operative legal phrase.
That's the operative legal standard. Right. And the fact is that although the evidence internally in the State Department, we have in the lawsuit, people who formerly worked in the State Department can testify that, yeah, the evidence is there. And I'm not saying Israel is any different than other countries have gross violations of human rights. We remember the My Lai massacre. That's probably the tip of the iceberg in Vietnam. Well, we're not supposed to provide any military security assistance unless, if there's been adequate remediation. The person's been punished and sanctioned, and their efforts been made to ensure it doesn't happen again. And this simply wasn't happening. We have never, ever, ever, that's now the 27th year of the Leahy Law, ever taken an Israeli unit and said you committed a gross violation of human rights, we're disqualifying you from military assistance.
It seems like, and you might even mention this, I don't want, if I'm incorrect, certainly correct me, but it seems like we have in the United States an Israel exception to this rule.
Yeah, right, but it's not written into the law. I mean, there's no doubt, and this is where the point of the rule of law comes into play. If Congress wants to say you can apply this law to everybody but Israel, or to everybody but Ukraine or something, they probably have the authority to do that. A foreign country doesn't have a whole lot of standing to complain. But that's not what the Leahy Law says. It's just as an even-handed standard applied to everybody in the world. There's no waiver provision in it. And if you're going to have the rule of law, you got to apply the law as is. And if you don't like it, our system is you go back to Congress, you think you need to change it. But that's what the rule of law is about, process. You can't just decide, well, Israel's really important, security would be embarrassing, and we like Netanyahu, we don't like him, and therefore we'll do X, Y, Z. That's simply not law. That's
not supposed to be a political issue.
Those are politics. That's not law.
Right.
And I think what we have in this situation, the State Department, I would characterize, they've reduced law to what I call a jumble of political calculations with ulterior motives. I mean, everybody knows what's going on there. There have been several books about this as well. Another example, we are claiming that the Leahy Law is being violated here in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act.
So I understand the essence of that is that, and you go through some of the bases for the factual bases, but you go through, for example, the World Court, International Court of Justice has twice.
They preliminarily found genocide, and the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the Prime Minister and the former Defense Minister for crimes against humanity and war crimes.
And the World Court has also found, too, that very recently that there's illegality of the occupation in some respects.
Yeah, in the West Bank.
Also, the human rights organizations, virtually every international human rights organization is sounding the alarms and calling this genocide and using other terms consistent with that. So.
Yeah, there was an advisory opinion that the International Court of Justice issued with regard to the legality of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza.
We have 5 minutes left, which is going to be pretty tight. So if you can get to what you consider to be perhaps the most instructive aspects of this for our audience of lawyers and lay people, including, for example, the plaintiffs. The complaint is styled as Gaza is the last name of an individual. It's poetic in some sense.
No.
It's not a last name. It's a
pseudonym. Yeah,
pseudonym.
Because she's been displaced 16 or 17 times. We had to put the names under seal, some of the addresses, because we fear retaliation, as you could imagine. This is at least even knowing what we're trying to do. Based upon what Israeli military leaders have said, they couldn't be doing what they're doing without U.S. weapons. That at least diminishes the horrors that are ongoing. One lawsuit is not going to bring us nirvana. On the other hand, the law moves by inches. The Brown versus Board of Education didn't result in desegregation in 1 year either, right? But you got to start someplace. If not us, who? If not now, when? And so this is kind of drawing the line where we're going to push back and see where the law will take us.
For sure. So what do you, and we have probably a few minutes left here, what do you hope to accomplish, broadly? I'm certainly moving the needle forward on all the fronts that you've discussed, whether it's this particular issue or our relationship to rule of law in this country.
Yeah.
So
I think the most important thing is to get people to understand the Constitution And law is about process more than results. And if you throw out the process, we're back to the law of the jungle,
Right.
because there isn't any articulable standard to say, okay, you can use the process here, but not there, because everybody's going to have a different view of when you should abandon the process. I liken it to, when O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murder charges, we didn't say we throw out jury trial. Okay, in human institutions, it's going to stumble from time to time. But the important thing is the integrity of the process, which we don't have anymore. We don't have transparent government. The Congress has been reduced to an ink blot. The courts don't push back. Everything's immune if it's all the executive branch or state secrets or delegation or anything like that. So we really have the last guardrail. It's you and it's me. And lawyers need to be the first responders, not the last responders.
Right.
And unfortunately, we have been last responders, So part of our duty as lawyers is to educate the public as well. And again, going back, and I'm jumping around, in Watergate, the day after the Saturday Night Massacre, there were 50,000 telegrams from American citizens saying, that's impeachable offense. You got to move. That's why Congress went forward. Right now, the public is almost somnolent on this. And part of it is because the lawyers aren't doing their job either. The leaders are quiet in some sense because we've got such an empire mentality. No one speaks out and says anything. Just another example.
People are afraid. People are afraid.
Yeah, they're afraid or they're frightened. And part of it is the mentality, though, of empire. I mean, in the last week where President-elect Trump says, well, we're going to go back and take Panama again. The Chinese have business there. I said, but what he left out was this. We were the ones who stole Panama in 1903. We, with Teddy Roosevelt, with our military, orchestrated its secession from Colombia. Then we coerced this treaty on Panama, which couldn't defend itself without our troops. And then you remember when we were negotiating return it, Senator S.I. Hayakawa said, we stole it fair and square. I said, you should have stopped in mid-sentence. We stole it, but no, it wasn't fair and square. We've just conspired to conceal and hide the incriminating evidence ever afterwards. Sure. So they see this betrays this empire mentality, which is totally and completely wrongful. We need invincible self-defense. We understand that we cannot go abroad in search of monsters to destroy because we can't make the world perfect.
Foundational principle for the long-term security of this country is that, not looking for monsters abroad, right? And I think that's a lot of what this is about. And with that, we are really right at the end. So if you got a quick 10-second thought to close us out.
Oh, I encourage everybody who has been on this program, if you want to know more about me, you may not. I have a 100-book reading list. It's on my website, www.lawofficesofbrucefein.com. You'll be able to read most everything I've written in the last many years. It may be, you may not get through it all, but you'll get a sense of an alternative way to approach law than what's the ordinary course.
Thank you for your leadership, courage, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. That is a wrap on this episode of You and the Law.